I never imagined the cruelest day of my life would unfold right at my sister's baby shower, when I stood up in that hall of familiar faces, took my husband's hand and called my daughter over. The entire room went silent. My mother went pale, and Becky, the golden child raised on a pedestal, screamed that I'd destroyed her life just to get revenge. In that instant, I realized years of quiet suffering had turned me into a ghost in my own family, but not anymore. If you think this is just another ordinary family story, you're wrong. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next shocking chapters we bring you. The two-lane road slicing through Willow Creek twisted like a scar through the otherwise sleepy Pennsylvania landscape. A gray mist hovered above the dew-heavy fields, wrapping around the naked trees like desperate hands. Carol Mitchell gripped the steering wheel of her dark blue SUV until her knuckles paled her thumb, rubbing nervously at the indentation on her wedding ring. The rental car smelled faintly of stale air freshener and the ghost of the last driver's cheap cologne. Each mile marker she passed seemed to pulse like an accusation. Willow Creek 12 miles, Willow Creek 7 miles, Willow Creek 3 miles. Home, if you could still call it that. She drew a slow breath, feeling the old ache settle heavy on her chest. The roads here were too familiar, every cracked shoulder, every leaning mailbox still in the same spot since her high school days. It was a town that seemed allergic to change, clinging to its faded traditions and whispered judgments like a security blanket. Her eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, half expecting the haunted expression staring back. Tired lines carved under her eyes, subtle but undeniable. Success hadn't erased the traces of sleepless nights or the stress that lived coiled at the base of her skull. Ahead, a battered wooden sign welcomed her back in peeling white paint. Willow Creek, founded 1832. Below it, someone had propped a handmade placard, "Support our local high school football team." Of course, this town had always been football church socials and who was marrying whom. Not marketing strategy, not digital campaigns, not international clients. Not her. A cold wave of memory cut through her, her father clutching his chest on the sagging porch steps 7 years ago. Robert Mitchell, with his patient brown eyes and calloused hands that always smelled faintly of wood stain and pipe tobacco. The way he'd gasped her name, then fell forward, striking his head on the brick walkway. The gurgle in his throat haunted her worse than any nightmare. She'd dropped to her knees, screaming for her mother. Eleanor had come running her face, a ghostly mask of horror, then so quickly blank. Numb, as if something essential inside her had simply switched off. Later at the funeral, Carol remembered standing beside her sister Becky, clutching a damp tissue, feeling utterly detached. Her mother had gripped Becky's hand so tight their knuckles turned white, leaving Carol isolated at the edge of her own family's grief. A flash of taillights brought her back. She exhaled sharply, realizing she'd drifted slightly toward the center line. She corrected with a jolt, muttering under her breath, "God damn it, focus." The car shuddered over a patch of uneven asphalt. Her heart was still racing, not from the road, but from the mental ambush. Why now? Why did her father's lifeless eyes keep pushing into her mind's eye, demanding to be acknowledged? "Because you're going back," her mind whispered. "Back to the house where he died. Back to the town that only ever made you feel small." She rolled her shoulders, trying to force the tension out. "You're 34. You run your own division. You have a husband, a daughter. You are not that overlooked girl anymore." The words were a weak balm. Her throat still tightened, her pulse still pounded at her temples. Another image surfaced, Becky at 17, golden hair curled perfectly for prom, their mother hovering close with a camera beaming like the sun broke just for her eldest. Carol had been in the background holding the hem of Becky's dress so it didn't drag in the dirt, ignored, except when Eleanor snapped at her to stand up straight for once. She forced her thoughts elsewhere. Chicago. Her apartment overlooking Lake Michigan, glass walls that caught the light at dawn. Her office sleek and modern, the team that respected her ideas. The warm feel of Thomas's hand on the small of her back at company parties. Lily's squeal of delight when she swung her up after a long day. That was real. That was her life. Willow Creek. It was just a 3-day detour. She'd keep her composure, smile, politely endure the questions. "When are you moving back? Isn't it time to settle down and then escape back to where she belonged?" Except she muttered, lips curling with dark irony, "This time you're not leaving empty-handed." Her fingers drummed the steering wheel. Becky didn't know yet. None of them did. The thought made her stomach twist with a cocktail of anticipation and dread. What would their faces look like when they saw Lily? when they realized Carol had built a family on her own terms far from their prying eyes. Another ripple of memory caught her off guard, her mother's face, the last Christmas she'd come home 5 years ago. Carol had tried to explain her new promotion, bursting with cautious pride. Eleanor had listened with that polite glazed smile, then interrupted to fuss over Becky's engagement ring. The conversation pivoted so sharply Carol had felt physically dizzy. She blew out a breath, fighting down the familiar swell of anger, and something darker hurt that still sat raw, unhealed. The GPS chirped, "Turn left on Maple Avenue." Maple Avenue. Of course, it was still Maple Avenue, with the same aging oaks reaching skeletal arms over cracked sidewalks. Her childhood home lurked 3 blocks down a white colonial with green shutters that badly needed repainting. As she turned onto the street, her chest constricted. Each house she passed seemed to leer at her, complicit in the small-town myth she'd spent her life trying to escape. A figure in the yard ahead caught her eye. An elderly man raking leaves paused to watch her car crawl by, eyes narrowing in that suspicious small-town way. Did he recognize her? Was he already calculating which Mitchell daughter had returned and why? Probably. In Willow Creek, privacy was a foreign concept. Everyone knew everyone's business, or thought they did. The Mitchell house came into view. The hedges were overgrown, the paint on the porch rail flaking like sunburn. She parked at the curb, engine ticking in the silence when she turned it off. Her hands rested on the steering wheel long after the key had been pulled. Through the windshield, she studied the familiar facade. How many hours had she spent on those steps as a teenager, scuffing the toe of her sneakers against the wood, waiting for Becky to come back from whatever shining social event she'd been invited to? How many nights had she stared up at that dark window, wishing her mother might knock on the door and say she was proud of her for once? Carol's reflection in the rearview mirror caught her by surprise. For a second, she didn't see herself at 34. She saw a 15-year-old girl with hollow eyes clutching a debate trophy her mother never came to watch. She blinked hard, breaking the spell. "Why the hell are you here, Carol Mitchell?" she whispered, voice hoarse. But she already knew the answer. It wasn't duty. It wasn't some deep-seated love for Becky or a need to be forgiven. It was Lily. Lily deserved to know her roots, even if those roots were twisted and brittle. And despite everything, some fragile, battered part of Carol still wanted to try. To stand in front of her mother, her sister, this entire damn town, and say, "This is my family, this is my life, see me." She picked up her phone, opened a message thread with Thomas. A simple text waited there from him that morning. "You've got this. We'll see you soon. I love you." Her thumb hovered over the reply, then she simply typed, "Almost there. God help us all." Carol took one last breath, the cold air inside the car burning her lungs. Then she pushed the door open, stepped out onto the cracked asphalt of Maple Avenue, and walked toward the house that had never quite felt like home. Her boots crunched over dead leaves, the sound loud in the hollow stillness. Inside her chest, her heart beat a nervous rhythm. As much as she tried to steel herself, she knew nothing could fully prepare her for what waited beyond that front door. And though she tried to deny it deep down, a voice whispered with terrifying clarity, "This time everything will change." The Willow Creek Community Center smelled like cinnamon pastries, stale coffee, and an undercurrent of anxiety Carol couldn't quite shake. A long table groaned under platters of cookies, cupcakes stacked in pink towers, and bowls of pastel mints that stuck to the paper doilies. The high ceilings amplified every voice, every forced laugh, so the place felt twice as loud, twice as invasive. Carol stepped through the door with a practiced smile she'd perfected in countless boardrooms. But this was different. This was home turf, if by home you meant a place that still had the power to strip you raw. The first person to spot her was Mrs. Langley, her old neighbor who had once chased Carol and Becky off her lawn with a broom for trying to sell lemonade on a Sunday. Her eyes lit up with a spark of nosy delight. "Carol Mitchell, I'd hardly have known you. Chicago suits you, dear, although you've gotten so slim. Almost too slim." "Hello, Mrs. Langley. It's good to see you," Carol lied, pressing a polite hand to the woman's papery arm. Mrs. Langley's eyes darted around conspiratorially. "Your mama must be beside herself to have all her girls together again. Tell me now, have you found yourself a young man out there in that big city?" It started, the first poke at the hornet's nest. Carol's smile didn't falter. "I've been busy with work, but I'm very happy." The older woman tutted. "Happiness is fine, dear, but it doesn't keep your bed warm at night or give your mama grandchildren." Her eyes sparkled, delighted by her own audacity. Then she patted Carol's hand as if to soften the blow before wandering off. Carol exhaled slowly, already feeling sweat gather at the small of her back. The familiar urge to bolt for the door clawed at her, but she squared her shoulders and moved deeper into the hall. The room was a riot of pink. Pink streamers twisted across the ceiling. Pink balloons clustered at each table like cotton candy tumors. Even the cake was pink, sporting a cheerful frosting message, "Welcome, baby girl." And there at the center of it all was Becky. Her sister sat on a decorated chair, a literal throne of pale roses glowing under soft string lights. She wore a flowing blush dress that skimmed her pronounced belly, her blonde hair cascading over her shoulders in gentle waves. Her cheeks were flushed with excitement, and she beamed up at their mother, who was fussing with a sash that read, "Mommy-to-be." Carol paused, taking in the tableau. Eleanor stood slightly behind Becky, adjusting the sash with trembling hands, her mouth stretched into that bright, brittle smile that Carol knew so well. Whenever they posed for family Christmas photos, that was the smile she'd wear right before snapping, "Carol, can you try not to squint for once?" "Carol, there you are." Her mother's voice cracked through the din, instantly drawing attention. Half a dozen heads swiveled toward her. Carol felt the air shift as if the crowd collectively took a step closer without moving at all. "Hi, Mom," Carol said, her own voice sounding foreign in her ears. Eleanor swooped in, gripping Carol's arms with fingers that dug into her coat. "Darling, you're late. We started the games already. Becky's measuring contest was hilarious. Didn't want to wait on the city girl, you know." Her laugh was high and just slightly off. "I hit some traffic." "Oh, of course, always such important places to be. Well, come say hello. Becky will be thrilled." She led Carol by the elbow, and for one surreal moment, Carol felt 5 years old again, being steered by an impatient mother through Sunday school. As they neared Becky's throne, her sister's face lit up, though Carol couldn't quite tell if it was genuine joy or merely performative for the audience. Becky looked radiant undeniably. She had that soft, ripe glow of impending motherhood, and the gathered women orbited her like loyal satellites. "Look who finally decided to grace us with her presence," Becky sang out. Her words danced playfully, but Carol heard the subtle barbs laced beneath. "Hey, Beck, you look amazing," Carol managed, and she meant it even if the compliment felt awkward on her tongue. Becky leaned forward to air kiss her cheek, the scent of sweet lotion and strawberry shampoo striking a dissonant chord of memory. The same shampoo she'd used as a teenager when Carol would sit on her bed listening to Becky ramble about prom dresses and boys trying so hard to pretend she belonged. "I was telling them about your big job," Becky announced, gesturing to the gaggle of old schoolmates gathered nearby. "Some fancy marketing position, right? Chicago's gotta be so exciting. But isn't it lonely? I couldn't stand being out there all by myself." There it was, the first cut. Before Carol could answer, one of the women, Marissa Cole, who used to sit behind her in chemistry, jumped in. "Oh my God, Carol, are you still single? I mean, you always were so driven. Remember how you used to have color-coded binders for every subject?" She giggled, eyes darting to Becky for approval. "I guess career girls put off all the family stuff, huh?" Heat crept up Carol's neck. "Actually?" "Oh, it's so true," Becky interrupted with a titter patting her belly. "I told James if I had to work full-time, we'd probably never have kids. It's just too much. Carol was always the ambitious one. Remember her winning all those trophies?" Carol blinked, feeling the sudden shift of every eye back to her. Waiting, judging. Her throat closed up. "Yeah, well, it's worked out for me," she said evenly, though the words tasted sour. "Of course it has," Eleanor chirped a little too loudly. "Carol sends the most wonderful Christmas cards, always posing in front of a new building or on some fancy business trip. Such adventures. Not like pictures of sweet babies, but impressive in their own way." There was a ripple of polite laughter, some of it strained. Carol fought to keep her smile in place, her hands curling around the strap of her purse so tightly her knuckles whitened. She wanted to scream or run, or just disappear into the shadowy corners of the hall. Instead, she stood there nodding and smiling like a goddamned automaton, while her mother and sister traded glances over her head, a silent language she'd never been fluent in. Finally, Becky squeezed her hand with a bright, insincere sympathy. "We'll have to find you someone, Carol. Maybe Mark Edwards is still single. Remember how he always carried your books in junior high? Because I tutored him in algebra." Carol shot back sharper than intended. Becky's laugh was tinkling but cold. "Still, he'd love a smart woman. You know, if you ever decide to slow down. Before it's too late." Carol drew in a shallow breath, fighting the urge to snap. "Thanks for the advice." She glanced around for escape and found it in the refreshment table. "I'm going to get some punch." She could feel them watching her walk away, the swirl of whispered comments like nettles brushing her back. At the table, she braced her hands on the edge and closed her eyes. The sugary scent of pink lemonade was nauseating. 5 minutes back in this town and I'm already drowning. She opened her eyes just in time to see her mother pull Becky close, smoothing a stray hair behind her ear with aching tenderness. Their heads bent together, conspiratorial safe in their little universe of shared jokes and gentle touches. Carol looked down at the red plastic cup in her hand, suddenly unsure whether she wanted to drink it or crush it. "Why did you come back, Carol Mitchell? Why did you ever think it would be different?" But even as she asked it, the answer throbbed painfully clear. "'Cause maybe, just maybe, this time they'd see you. And if not, well, she had secrets of her own. Secrets that would soon turn this pretty pink world upside down." They were halfway through the third baby shower game by the time Carol managed to slip back into the circle of guests. The room was buzzing a sugar-fueled hum of anticipation and poorly disguised gossip. Streamers drooped slightly in the humid air, curling like dying vines. Aunt Claire was front and center, wielding a ball of pink yarn with theatrical flair. "All right, ladies, time for Guess the Belly. Each of you cut a length of yarn you think will fit perfectly around our beautiful Becky's bump. Closest guess gets a prize." A chorus of playful groans rose from the group. Carol tried to duck behind a taller cousin, but it was pointless. Mrs. Langley spotted her immediately, her eyes glittering with delighted mischief. "Oh, Carol dear, don't try to hide. We want to see how the career woman does at baby games." Carol's smile was frozen. "Of course, I wouldn't miss it." She accepted the yarn with careful fingers, trying not to let it tremble. She'd been navigating multi-million-dollar brand campaigns for years, could stand in front of CEOs and hold her ground without flinching. But this felt like walking into a firing squad. One by one, the guests measured out their guesses, some too long, some comically short. They laughed and teased, holding up loops of yarn to Becky's protruding belly and squealing over how close or far off they were. Carol's turn came. She tried to eye Becky's waist discreetly, calculating with a kind of desperate logic. Becky was always slender, even now with the obvious swell of late pregnancy. Maybe a little more than twice Carol's own waist. She cut the yarn decisively. Becky lifted her arms with a bright, expectant grin. Carol looped the yarn around her, trying not to breathe in the scent of vanilla lotion that brought back too many half-forgotten memories of shared bedrooms and teenage secrets. She tied it gently at the front. When she let go, there was a good 3 inches of slack. The room erupted. "Oh, my Lord!" Carol squealed, Marissa clapping a hand over her mouth. "Were you trying to wrap a pumpkin? Becky's nowhere near that big." Even Becky burst out laughing, doubling over slightly with one hand braced on her bump. "Wow, sis, guess city girls really don't have any clue about real life or babies." Carol's face burned. Her mouth opened-closed again. The humiliation was a living thing in her gut, clawing upward until she thought she might choke on it. Mrs. Langley leaned in, conspiratorially stage-whispering to her nearest neighbor. "Well, can't blame her. No experience with baby bellies if you never bothered finding a husband first." The laughter was like salt in an old wound, sharp, stinging, unstoppable. Carol forced a tight smile, nodding as if in on the joke, though inside her ribs felt hollow. Her heart thudded painfully. She felt exposed in a way she hadn't since she was a gawky 12-year-old at Becky's dance recital, standing awkwardly off stage in a too large dress her mother barely remembered to hem. A flash went off. Someone, probably one of Becky's eager high school friends, snapped a picture just as Carol stood there, hands frozen mid-air, fake grin still plastered across her face. Becky wiped tears from her eyes, catching her breath. Her voice rose over the dwindling laughter. "Oh, come on, don't tease her too much. My sisters just never had to worry about these things, have you, Carol? No morning sickness, no nursery to decorate, no well-man around to help make one." She delivered it like a joke, but her eyes locked on Carol's with a glint that was unmistakably cruel. For a heartbeat, the room was deathly silent. Everyone seemed to lean in, waiting to see if Carol would break. Carol didn't give them the satisfaction. She sucked in a steadying breath, let the corner of her mouth twitch in something that might pass for amusement. "Guess not," she said lightly, her voice only trembling at the edges. "But there's still time, right?" Becky shrugged, smug, sure if the right miracle comes along. That was the cue for the crowd to laugh again, though it was more nervous now. A ripple of tension moved through the women clustered around them. Some avoided Carol's eyes entirely. Others smirked behind their hands, delighted by the cheap drama. Carol excused herself as soon as the game moved on. She made it to the side table where the discarded cups and plates were stacked, gripping the edge so hard her knuckles went white. Her throat burned hot with shame, and something else raged sharp and metallic on her tongue. She felt her phone buzz against her hip. With shaking hands, she pulled it out and typed quickly under the tablecloth's edge. "You sure are they ready?" 3 pulsing dots appeared almost immediately. Absolutely, just say the word. I've got Lily practicing her big smile for Grandma. Carol's chest tightened. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard, then typed, "Give me 5 minutes. I want them nice and cozy in their smug little bubble first." She slipped the phone back into her purse, exhaled a long, shuddery breath, and forced herself to turn back to the party. Across the room, her mother was leaning over Becky, fussing with her hair, her face bright with something that might have once been pure joy, but now looked suspiciously like willful blindness. Carol watched them with an ache that felt older than her own bones. It struck her then how easy it had always been for them. The automatic closeness, the mutual mirroring of expressions, the private jokes. They existed in a tiny, self-contained ecosystem of mutual validation, and Carol had spent her whole life orbiting just outside it, fingers pressed against the glass. Now here she was, 34, about to detonate a secret so enormous it would shatter that delicate terrarium forever. And the worst part? Some terrible buried part of her was still hoping that once the dust settled, maybe, just maybe, they would finally look at her and see more than the leftover. Becky's laugh rang out again, high and sweet. Their mother joined in, her hand resting possessively on Becky's shoulder. Carol watched that tender gesture, feeling a phantom weight there on her own shoulder, where such a hand had never rested. She inhaled, squared her shoulders, and thought with a flicker of dark amusement, "Let them laugh. They're not going to be laughing much longer." From across the room, Becky caught her eye, still wearing that smug, pitying little smile. Carol's blood went hot. She held her sister's gaze and slowly raised her cup in a mock toast. Becky blinked confused, then shrugged and turned back to her admirers. Carol's hand trembled only slightly as she sipped her too-sweet punch. Her heart was pounding, adrenaline starting to burn through the hurt. The stage was almost set. The players were all exactly where she needed them. All that was left was to drop the match. The laughter in the hall sounded like something hollowed out, echoing inside a cheap toy drum. It filled the Willow Creek Community Center with a bright, tinny edge that made Carol's teeth hurt. She stood off to the side, arms folded, forcing a polite smile as her mother clapped her hands together and chirped, "All right, next up, let's see who can guess Becky's belly size the best." Aunt Claire, with her ever-present bright floral scarf, passed around a spool of pink ribbon. The women giggled, pulled out lengths of it, snipping with tiny silver scissors, each one bragging how well they knew baby bumps. Carol could feel her own heart racing faster than it should, like she was about to stand on a stage under a spotlight. Which she supposed was exactly what was happening, only here. The audience was armed with old grudges, small-town gossip, and a taste for humiliation disguised as fun. Becky beamed from her throne-like chair hands delicately resting on her stomach, her blonde hair shimmering under the string lights. Her glow was real pregnancy suited her, and she wore the adoration around her like a silk shawl. Marissa Cole finished cutting her ribbon and shot Carol a smirk. "You're up, city girl. Let's see those big city measurement skills." Someone snickered. Carol tried not to visibly stiffen. She forced a chuckle instead and took the scissors, pretending to study Becky with exaggerated concentration. Inside, she wanted to throw the scissors across the room. How many times had she stood in exactly this position, on the edge of a crowd playing the clown to keep from showing the bruise? Her mother's voice played in her head, soft but needling. "Don't make everything so serious, Carol. Learn to laugh at yourself once in a while." Carol measured out the ribbon, cutting it with what she prayed was close enough. She knew, even as she did it, though, that it was wrong too generous by at least several inches. Her hand shook faintly as she handed it to Aunt Claire. Aunt Claire couldn't hide her grin. "All right, let's see what Big Sister thinks." Carol stepped forward and carefully draped the ribbon around Becky's midsection. The ends overlapped by a full hand's width. The hall burst into raucous laughter. Marissa cackled, nearly doubling over. "That's like measuring a Thanksgiving turkey, not a baby." Even Becky threw her head back and let out a sharp, high laugh. Her cheeks were flushed with triumph. "Oh, come on now," she tried. Their mother tittered, eyes darting around to be sure everyone else was still amused. But then Becky leaned forward, her voice raised just enough to carry across the crowd. "Poor Carol. She doesn't really have much experience with these things, babies, families. You know, hard to guess something you've never had to worry about. Single life and all that." The laughter took on a different pitch, sharper, uglier. Carol's head snapped up. For a moment, everything narrowed. It felt like she was looking at her sister through the wrong end of a telescope, Becky glowing smug, protected on all sides by her court of admirers, and herself standing there holding a limp length of pink ribbon like an idiot. Someone snapped a photo. The flash burst against her retinas, burning the moment into something that would probably show up on Facebook by dinner. Carol swallowed against the acid climbing her throat. Her tongue felt too thick. She could taste the bright, sugary residue of the punch she'd sipped earlier, and it was suddenly nauseating. She tried to smile, managed it, or at least she thought she did. Her face felt tight, stretched in ways that didn't quite fit anymore. "Guess I should stick to marketing figures instead of waistlines," she said lightly, hoping the self-deprecation would smooth it over. But Becky's eyes glittered. "That might be best," she said, giving Carol's arm a patronizing little pat. Then to the crowd, "My sister's always been more comfortable with charts and graphs than diapers." The crowd roared again. Carol's vision tunneled. She caught a whiff of vanilla lotion and felt a memory slam into her, them at 16 and 14 crammed together in their childhood bathroom. Becky had taught her how to hot roll her hair for sophomore homecoming. Carol had burned her neck on the iron. Becky had laughed, then dabbed aloe on it with tender fingers. What the hell had happened to them? She turned sharply and walked away, nearly bumping into a side table stacked with tiny party favors, pink bags tied in curling ribbon little stickers that said, "Thank you for celebrating our sweet pea." Carol pressed her palm flat against the table to steady herself. Her heart was racing too fast. Her hands itched to grab her phone. She knew what she'd see there if she opened it, a chain of reassuring texts waiting. She couldn't wait anymore. With her back half turned so no one would see, she slid her phone from her purse. Her thumb hovered over the message thread. Thomas's last note from 2 hours ago stared up at her. "Whenever you're ready." She's been practicing what to say. She keeps asking if her grandma will be nice. Carol's breath hitched painfully. She typed with careful, deliberate strokes. "Are you sure they're all here? Are you both ready?" Her thumb hovered over send, her stomach twisting so violently she thought she might be sick. Then she pressed it. 3 agonizing dots. Then, 100% sure, Lily's excited, I've got this C. Carol closed her eyes, let out a breath that felt like it scraped her ribs on the way up. She slipped the phone back into her purse, rolled her shoulders, then smoothed her hair behind her ears like she was stepping on stage. Back by the circle of women, Becky was still basking, one hand curved over her stomach possessively. Their mother hovered close, beaming down with that worshipful pride that had never quite reached Carol. Carol's gaze darted from face to face Marissa with her pinched grin, Aunt Claire already digging through her bag for the next party game prize, old Mrs. Langley whispering behind a liver-spotted hand. Soon all their careful, smug certainty would crack like the cheap plaster of this community hall. Her pulse steadied oddly calm now that the moment was hurtling toward her. She could almost taste the collision coming. And for the first time since stepping foot back in Willow Creek, a tiny, dangerous smile played at the corner of her mouth. Let them think they know everything, she thought. Let them keep laughing. Because any minute now, the real game was going to begin. The room was in the middle of its next round of squealing over a diaper raffle when the main doors opened. The hinges groaned loud enough that even Aunt Claire paused her breathless instructions on how to fold tickets. The sound cut through the music playing on low from a cheap Bluetooth speaker. Carol felt it before she turned. Her skin pricked, the tiny hairs on her arms rising as if bracing for impact. And there they were. Thomas stood framed in the doorway, shoulders squared under his navy blazer. In his arms, Lily was perched high on his hip, her tiny patent leather shoes dangling curls a dark halo around her curious face. Thomas scanned the room, his eyes searching until they found Carol. A small smile ghosted across his lips, soft, certain the same look that still made Carol's heart catch in her throat even after 5 years of marriage. Then he started forward. Conversation died. A hush swept across the hall like a sudden gust snuffing out every candle. Plates were set down, champagne glasses paused midair. Marissa's mouth actually fell open. Becky, still seated in her flowered throne, went rigid. Their mother clutched the back of Becky's chair so tightly her knuckles gleamed white. Thomas walked with that quiet, self-contained grace Carol loved, like he was comfortable anywhere. Even here, even in this lion's den. "Sorry we're late," he said, voice carrying easily across the cavernous hall. "Flight was delayed. Little one was dying to meet her family." Carol's breath hitched. She hadn't planned on it happening quite like this, had imagined maybe a gentle lead-in, a few cautious hints. But the way Thomas strode toward her, now Lily's arm tightening around his neck, there was no easing into it. This was ripping off the bandage all at once. She stepped forward to meet them, her heels tapping sharply on the polished floor. When Thomas reached her, he passed Lily into her arms without a word. The little girl clung to Carol's neck, her face half buried in her mother's shoulder. And still the room stared, collective shock rippling through every pewter curl old lady and fresh-faced bridesmaid look-alike. Carol felt their eyes like physical pressure. She cleared her throat, heart hammering so hard it rattled her ribs. "Everyone," she said, and hated how thin her voice sounded. She drew in a deeper breath, tried again. "Everyone, this is Thomas. My husband. And this," she squeezed Lily closer, the child's small body so achingly solid against her. "This is our daughter, Lily." Silence. Long, terrible electric silence. Then Mrs. Langley made a tiny choking noise. Someone else let out a strangled laugh as if it had to break out somewhere. Carol watched the crowd register it in stages, first confusion, then the quick calculation of how this might reflect on them, and finally that greedy spark of scandal lighting in too many eyes. Her mother's mouth opened and closed. Twice. Her free hand fluttered uselessly at her throat, while her other still gripped Becky's chair as though it were the only thing anchoring her to the floor. Becky let out a thin, high sound that might have been a laugh or might have been the start of a sob. What, Carol? What the hell are you talking about?" Thomas, ever the anchor, wrapped a steadying arm around Carol's waist. "Hello, Eleanor. Becky." He nodded politely as if greeting them on a sunny suburban sidewalk, not detonating a nuclear bomb right in the middle of their precious party. "I've heard so much about both of you." No one moved. No one breathed. Lily twisted slightly in Carol's arms, peering shyly at the silent, gaping crowd. "Hi, Grandma," she said, voice small but bright, testing out the new word with innocent excitement. That did it. Eleanor actually staggered. Her grip slipped on the chair, and Becky shot to her feet to catch her. Their mother's eyes were wild, darting from Lily to Carol and back again, as though she couldn't make the pieces fit. You have a child." Eleanor's voice cracked on the last word, the syllable splintering under the weight of it. Carol swallowed. "Yes, Mom. Lily is 4. Thomas and I got married 5 years ago, in Chicago." It hung there heavy and unstoppable, a truth that couldn't be sucked back in, couldn't be repackaged into something neat and acceptable. Becky's hands flew to her own stomach, cradling her unborn child like a fragile treasure. "You've been married for 5 years, you have a daughter, and you didn't tell us not once, not even a call?" The brittle quality of her voice sliced at Carol in a way nothing else had. Because under the outrage there was hurt. Wounded, floundering hurt. "Becky!" Carol started, but Thomas squeezed her gently. She took another breath. "It wasn't about you. It was never meant to be some big betrayal." "Oh, spare me." Becky's laugh was ugly, too loud in the stricken silence. "This is your revenge, isn't it? You couldn't stand me having my day, so you showed up to upstage me with your secret family." "That's not true," Carol said sharply, feeling Lily flinch slightly. She gentled her tone. "I didn't come here to steal anything from you." Eleanor still hadn't moved. Her eyes were glassy. "Carol, you let us think all these years. We pitied you, prayed you'd find someone. We thought you were alone." Her breath shuddered out. "How could you do this to us?" Carol felt something in her chest twist painfully. "Because every time I tried to share my life with you, my work, my home, my happiness, you all made it so clear you didn't want to hear it. Not if it wasn't the story you wanted. And eventually it just got easier. Not to try." She didn't mean for her voice to break, but it did. Lily wrapped her small arms tighter around her neck, offering silent, unconscious comfort. Aunt Claire stepped forward, finally breaking the dreadful tableau. Her expression was cautious eyes darting to Eleanor as if seeking permission. "She's a beautiful little girl, Carol." That tiny shift opened a seam in the tension. A murmur ran through the crowd, people trading quick glances, reassessing the gossip calculus. Some faces showed dawning sympathy. Others were still scandal-hungry, but at least they were breathing again. Thomas cleared his throat, his deep voice cutting through the swirl. "We didn't come here to cause a scene. We came because Lily deserves to know her family, and because we hoped somehow that you'd want to know her too." For the first time, Carol saw her mother's composure crack completely. Tears welled, catching in the fine lines at the corners of her eyes. She reached out a trembling hand but stopped short of touching Lily. Her fingers curled helplessly back toward her chest. Lily peered at her wide-eyed, then offered shyly, "Mommy says you're my grandma." Eleanor's breath hitched. Her face crumpled just for a second before she smoothed it with a quivering hand. And Carol thought maybe, just maybe. But Becky's face was still carved from stone. She stepped closer, her voice low, raw with betrayal. "Congratulations, Carol. You managed to humiliate us all in one afternoon. I hope it was worth it." Carol didn't respond. She didn't trust herself to. Instead, she held Lily a little tighter, drew strength from Thomas's warm hand on her back, and let the stunned room adjust to the new shape of their lives. Whatever came next, however ugly or redemptive it was, finally brutally honest. And maybe that was worth more than all the polite lies in the world. Becky's sharp cry split the charged silence like a blade. It was a raw, keening sound that made Carol's stomach twist painfully. Her sister's hands flew to her face, smearing fresh mascara down her cheeks as tears surged unchecked. "Oh my God, are you kidding me?" Becky's voice cracked high, breaking under the strain. She flung her arms out wildly, nearly knocking over a platter of pink frosted cupcakes. Is this why you came to ruin my day? My one day. Carol instinctively tightened her hold on Lily, who pressed her small face deeper into her mother's neck. The little girl's curls tickled Carol's jaw, her warm breath a fragile anchor in the storm that was rapidly consuming the room. It wasn't about you, Becky Carol managed, though her voice felt paper thin. I didn't come to ruin anything. We came because— Because what? Becky shrieked. So you could drop this bomb and watch everyone gawk at your big, dramatic secret family? This was supposed to be my day, Carol, my shower, my baby. God, you always have to make it about you somehow. The words landed like hard, open-handed slaps. Carol flinched even as something in her chest hardened. Always about her. The irony of it burned so deep she tasted it at the back of her throat. But before she could respond, a smaller, colder voice cut through the air. How could you do this, Carol? Her mother's face had gone so pale it was nearly translucent. Eleanor gripped the edge of Becky's throne-like chair knuckles, nodded her eyes, darting to Lily and back, as if trying to reconcile the bright living child with the betrayal she clearly felt. How could you keep her from us for 4 years? Eleanor's voice wavered brittle with a kind of stunned devastation. Your own mother, your sister. We could have known her from the start, watched her grow. I could have been there. Carol's breath came out in a shudder. The old, familiar urge to apologize reared up so powerfully it nearly choked her, because hadn't that always been her role? Smooth it over. Carry the blame. Keep the peace, even if it cost her every last shred of her own pride. But Thomas's hand came to rest on her shoulder, firm and grounding. It was a simple gesture, but it radiated calm into the chaotic spiral threatening to swallow her whole. He squeezed once, and when she glanced up at him, his eyes were steady, clear, unapologetic. It reminded her she wasn't that timid, overshadowed girl anymore. Still, her voice shook as she spoke. I didn't keep her from you to hurt you. It wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was because— Her throat bobbed. Because I didn't know how to give you pieces of my life when every other time I tried it felt like you didn't want them. That's not true, Eleanor snapped almost too quickly. Her gaze darted to Becky for backup, but Becky was too busy sobbing into her hands, shaking her head in disbelief. Carol felt her chest constrict around an old splintered pain. Isn't it, though, every big thing I tried to share, school, jobs, even moving, always turned back to Becky, her recitals, her boyfriends, her wedding. It got to the point where I just stopped trying. It hurt less to keep it to myself. Becky's head shot up. Her tear-streaked face was twisted in confusion and something close to horror. What the hell are you even talking about? I never told you not to share your life. No, Carol said softly, you didn't have to. The implication hung between them thick as storm clouds. Becky's face crumpled like she wanted to argue but couldn't find a single word. Look at her, Eleanor, Thomas said then. His voice was low, but it cut through the hushed murmurs starting up around them. Look at Carol. Look at what this has cost all of you. For a moment their mother did. Really looked. Carol felt that stare as though it might skin her alive. There was confusion there, but also guilt flickering behind Eleanor's damp eyes. She's your granddaughter, Thomas continued, shifting to shield Carol just slightly. Lily's bright and funny and kind. She knows stories about all of you because Carol made sure she did, even without you asking, even without you caring to ask about her. Don't you dare stand there and act like we didn't care. Eleanor's voice cracked on the last word. I prayed every day that Carol would find someone, that she wouldn't be alone forever. And all the while, Thomas said more gently now, she wasn't. You just never gave her the space to tell you. Becky let out a low moan and sank back into her chair, pressing both palms against her belly, as if to protect her unborn child from the emotional shrapnel. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. Carol felt torn aching for her sister's pain, yet so unspeakably weary of being the only one to patch these wounds. Her hands trembled where they cradled Lily. Eleanor looked from Becky to Carol, her lips parting as if to speak, then clamping shut. She pressed a hand over her mouth, tears pooling, slipping through her thin fingers. No one else dared interrupt. The room that had been so alive with laughter and games not 10 minutes ago now held its collective breath, each person uncomfortably aware they were witnessing something private and raw. Finally, Thomas spoke again. None of this has to be the end, but it does have to be honest, Eleanor. Becky, all of it out in the open, ugly as it might be, otherwise what's the point? Lily, who'd been silent through it all, turned her wide eyes up to Carol. Mommy, she whispered, why is everyone so sad? It was a dagger to Carol's chest. She pressed a trembling kiss to her daughter's forehead. Because sometimes grown-ups forget how to listen with their hearts, but we're trying to remember. Thomas's hand squeezed her shoulder again. It was everything she needed permission to stand her ground, to let this fracture be seen for what it was instead of frantically trying to smooth it over. Carol faced her mother and sister fully, then heart in her throat. I don't want to keep Lily from you. That was never the goal. But I won't pretend anymore that it's been easy or that this family doesn't have cracks we've all ignored. Becky made a strangled sound, half sob, half breath. Her tear-blotched face looked painfully young as she whispered, I thought you didn't want us, that you left because you were better than all of this. Carol's own tears finally spilled over. I left because I didn't know how to fit into a family that only seemed to have room for one golden child, and it broke me that it was never me. That truth settled hard heavy. For a moment no one moved. Then Eleanor stepped forward, not much, just a tiny hesitant shuffle. Her hand lifted, trembled, hovered above Lily's dark curls. Carol held her breath. Can I? Eleanor choked on the words, voice hoarse. Carol nodded her heart, a painful knot. Lily peeked up curious, and Eleanor's hand finally settled on the little girl's head, fingers brushing through the soft hair with a wonder that was almost reverent. My grandbaby, Eleanor whispered almost to herself. Then, eyes shimmering, she met Carol's gaze. How do we start over, sweetheart? Tell me how. Carol didn't have that answer yet, but Thomas's hand was still on her shoulder, warm and unwavering, and Lily's arms were around her neck. Maybe that was enough of a start. Enough for her to draw a shaky breath and say simply, together. Carol stood there, her chest heaving with the weight of it all. Lily still wrapped around her, Thomas's hand firm on her shoulder, and felt every eye in that cavernous room boring into her. It was as if the entire community center had been scrubbed of oxygen, leaving only this charged, breathless space where decades of pain hovered like dust motes in the sunlight. She closed her eyes, drew in a slow breath that shuddered through her lungs, then opened them to fix on her mother. Eleanor looked older than she ever had, her carefully set hair trembling slightly as she held Lily's curls in her fingertips like she might vanish if she let go. Do you want to know why I never called to tell you I was engaged? Carol asked, her voice thin and cracking but determined. Or why I didn't send a wedding invitation? Or why you met your granddaughter today for the very first time? Her mother's eyes were wide and wet. Her mouth moved once, just a faint parting of lips, as if she wanted to beg her not to continue. But Carol didn't stop, couldn't stop. Because I spent my whole life trying to get you to look at me the way you look at Becky. Becky flinched at her name, her hand curling protectively over her belly again, but she didn't look away. That was something. Maybe the first real something in years. Carol swallowed hard. I remember when I got accepted to Northwestern on a full scholarship. God, I was shaking. I was so excited. I called home from the payphone by my dorm so you'd be the first to know. You answered, Mom, and I was practically shouting, telling you I'd won that scholarship contest and how it was going to pay for everything. I thought you'd be so proud. Eleanor closed her eyes, a tear slipping out even as she tried to keep her chin lifted. And do you remember what you said? Carol pressed on her voice raw. You said, that's nice, dear, but Becky's trying on wedding dresses today, so can I call you back later? Silence rippled out from them in waves. Even the clink of someone setting down a glass at the far refreshment table seemed painfully loud. Carol's eyes burned. She blinked hard, but the tears slipped free anyway, warm tracks down her cheeks. And it was always like that. Every milestone I hit, landing my internship, then my first promotion, moving to Chicago, every time I tried to share it, you brushed it aside for something Becky was doing. Her recitals, her first house, her pregnancies. Becky's gaze darted down her mouth, tightening color flushing her cheeks. It wasn't guilt exactly. It was more like a shocked realization, as if she was seeing the shape of Carol's life from an angle she'd never bothered to tilt her head toward before. Flashback swept over Carol, then unbidden. She could almost smell the old wood paneling of the living room back home, hear the scratchy phone cord as she wound it around her fingers. She was 22, backpack slung over her shoulder, the letter from Northwestern still damp from her sweaty grip. Her heart felt like a firecracker about to burst. They want me, she kept thinking. They want me for me. Not for Becky's sister, not for Eleanor's daughter, for me. She'd dialed home with shaking hands. The phone rang twice, then her mother picked up. Hello, Mitchell residence. Mom, it's me. I have the best news. Oh, well, don't keep me waiting, Carol. She sucked in a giddy breath. I won the National Marketing Initiative contest, full scholarship to Northwestern's master's program. I start this fall. A pause. Too long. Then a bright, brittle laugh. Well, that's wonderful, dear. But listen, I can't really talk right now. Becky's trying on gowns at Ashford Bridal. We're meeting the consultant about lace options. I'll call you later tonight, all right? Click! Carol stood there, phone still pressed to her ear, listening to the hollow dial tone. Her reflection in the foyer mirror stared back small alone, her eyes wide and too bright. She remembered slowly setting the phone down, her hand trembling so badly she almost dropped it. Back in the present, Carol lifted a hand to her mouth, trying to steady her breathing. That was the day I stopped telling you the big things, not because I didn't want to share them, but because it hurt less than hoping you'd care. Eleanor made a choked sound and covered her mouth with her hand. Tears streamed freely now, but she didn't reach out. Didn't cross the tiny yawning distance between them. Carol's heart twisted, half desperate for that gesture, half terrified of it. And Becky Carroll continued, turning her gaze on her sister. I never tried to steal this day from you. I wouldn't have come if I didn't think it mattered that Lily knows her aunt and her grandmother, that she knows her family, because despite everything I wanted that for her. Becky's eyes glittered, her mouth open-closed. Then finally she whispered so soft Carol almost missed it. I never knew you felt that way. Well, how could you? Carol laughed, but it broke off into something more like a sob. You've always had Mom's full attention. I spent years thinking if I just did more, achieved more, you'd all finally see me. But it was never enough. And I realize now that wasn't about me. It was about what you were willing to see. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. I didn't keep Lily from you to punish anyone. I kept her away because I couldn't stand the thought of her growing up feeling the way I did. Like she was second best, like she had to earn being loved. Another tear fell, then another. Carol couldn't stop them anymore. Thomas's hand moved from her shoulder to her back, rubbing slow, grounding circles. Lily nestled against Carol's chest, peeked up with solemn, puzzled eyes, one small hand brushing away a tear from her mother's cheek. Becky's own eyes had filled now, wide and liquid. She clutched her belly harder, her breath shallow and uneven. Finally, she looked at their mother as if searching for some explanation. Eleanor just shook her head helplessly, shoulders quivering with quiet sobs. And for a long, long moment, the three women stood caught in the painful gravity of old wounds laid bare, no parties, no balloons, no polite distractions left to hide behind. Just truth raw and unvarnished. Carol squeezed her eyes shut, letting the tears come, because there was nothing left to do but let the ugly history between them bleed out into the open air. Maybe that was the only way any of them could ever start to heal. When she opened her eyes again, Becky's face had softened uncertainty, battling with pain, and Eleanor was reaching up just barely, her hand trembling in the space between them, still not touching, but almost. Almost. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but for the first time in decades, it felt like the smallest, most fragile start. Becky's voice sliced through the tense quiet like a serrated knife. It wasn't fragile or hesitant this time, it was a shriek, sharp and jagged with fury. Is that it, Carol? She screamed, eyes flashing, one hand clutching her belly so tightly her knuckles blanched. Is that why you did this? Why you hid your husband and your kid for 4 years? So you could drop this little bomb right in the middle of my baby shower and steal every damn eye in the room? Was this your twisted idea of revenge? The words cracked through the hall, bouncing off the high ceilings, leaving a shocked hush in their wake. Carol's breath caught her vision, tunneling around the angry blur of her sister's face. Becky, no, God, it was never about. Don't you lie to me. Becky's voice rose again, pitching high enough that Lily whimpered softly and buried her face in Carol's shoulder. You waltz in here with your perfect little family, your perfect surprise, and look around. Everyone's staring at you now, not me, you. You couldn't stand that this was my day, so you destroyed it. Carol's mouth fell open. A dizzying wave of nausea swept through her. She clutched Lily closer, Thomas's steady hand anchoring her at her back, and shook her head with a strangled laugh. Destroyed it, Becky. I didn't come here to destroy anything. I came here because you're my sister. Because despite everything, I thought you might actually want to meet your niece. Becky let out a strangled sound that was half laugh, half sob. Oh, please, don't pretend this was some innocent family reunion. You've always been waiting for your moment to one-up me. To prove you were the one with the better life. Admit it. That did it. Something inside Carol snapped the old scar tissue, tearing fresh and raw. She squared her shoulders, her voice rising so clear and cold it seemed to silence even the buzzing whispers in the crowd. You know what, Becky, fine. Let's lay it all out, because for 34 years I've let both of you make me feel like I was always a step behind. The boring sister, the too ambitious daughter, the one who'd never have the ring, the house, the baby bump for Mom to fawn over. So yes, maybe there's a tiny piece of me that took some satisfaction in showing you that I didn't need any of this town's damn approval to build a beautiful life. A collective gasp swept through the hall. Someone actually dropped their glass. It shattered against the floor, but no one moved to clean it up. Becky's jaw dropped, her eyes filling with incredulous horror. "So that's it? You did come here to rub it in my face?" "No," Carol bit out. "I came here because I thought maybe stupidly that this could finally be different, that we could stop pretending, that you'd meet Lily and see that even if we took different roads, we're still family." Becky shook her head so violently her curls whipped around her shoulders. "Bullshit! You showed up like a grenade. You let me spend this whole day thinking you were still sad little single Carol so I could pity you, then you pulled this." "You think I wanted your pity," Carol barked. Her laugh was brittle, her arms tightening protectively around Lily. "My God, Becky, do you hear yourself? You've spent your entire life with Mom, doting on you, this whole town worshiping the ground you walk on, and you still think everything I do is about you." A sharp murmur rippled through the crowd. People were shifting uncomfortably, trying to look away, but their eyes kept darting back. Phones had appeared in hands. Carol caught the glint of a recording screen near the dessert table, someone's thumb hovering to discreetly capture the spectacle. "Go ahead, keep filming," she snapped, glaring straight at the woman. "Maybe it'll be the first honest family moment this town's ever seen." Becky's face crumpled, but her voice was still savage. "You're so selfish, Carol. You couldn't just let me have this one day where it was about my baby, my future. You had to make it all revolve around you. And you couldn't stand the idea that maybe, just maybe, my life didn't end up empty like you always assumed," Carol shot back. "That I found love, built something solid, and didn't need your approval. God forbid I exist outside of your shadow for 5 minutes." Her sister's eyes flared bright with fresh tears. "I never needed you to be beneath me." "Yes, you did." Carol's voice broke on a laugh that was all pain. "You needed me to stay the pathetic one so you could keep being the golden child. That's why when I tried to tell you about my engagement, you barely listened. Why, when Lily was born, I sent pictures, and you never even replied." Becky's hands flew to her mouth. Her eyes darted wildly, searching the crowd as if hoping someone would step in, someone would save her from this confrontation. No one did. They were all riveted, transfixed by the raw, ugly honesty unfolding like a car crash. Carol felt Thomas's hand shift, sliding from her back to her arm, a silent, "I'm right here." It steadied her just enough to keep going. "Do you know what's really sad?" Becky Carroll's voice lowered, trembling but relentless. "It's that I would have shared it all with you. Every ultrasound, every sleepless newborn night, every laugh over Lily's first steps. If you'd ever picked up the phone and asked me about my life instead of just talking about yours." Becky stumbled back a step, bumping into the table behind her. Her face was blotchy. Her mascara streaked her breathing, coming in quick, shallow gulps. And Carol suddenly saw her sister not as the untouchable golden girl, but as someone who looked terrified, fragile, grasping at the only narrative she'd ever known, the one where she was the center, and Carol revolved quietly around her. Lily shifted, peeking out from Carol's shoulder. Her big brown eyes, so full of innocent confusion, landed on Becky. "Why is Aunt Becky so mad, Mommy?" she whispered. It cut through the last of Carol's composure. Her mouth trembled, eyes stinging. Because sometimes grown-ups forget how to be kind when they're hurting, sweetheart." There it was again, a low collective sound from the crowd, part sympathy, part discomfort. A few faces turned away, ashamed to be witnessing something this private, but too many others watched avidly, phones still raised, hungry for the scandal. Becky's lips parted. Her voice came out thin, choked. "I didn't know you felt so small next to me." "Because you never cared to look," Carol whispered. Her own tears spilled over, dripping down to dampen Lily's hair. For a moment, just a breath, Becky's face wavered, like maybe she saw it all. The old dance of subtle neglect, the way Carol had been left reaching for scraps of approval. But then Becky's eyes hardened again, her mouth clamping shut as she wrapped her arms protectively over her belly. And Carol realized maybe that was all her sister could give right now. Maybe Becky's pain wouldn't let her see past her own betrayal, not yet. She drew in a shaking breath, shifting Lily higher on her hip. Thomas stepped closer, his presence solid, unyielding, his glare sweeping over the still gaping audience. "This isn't your spectacle," he growled to no one in particular, and yet to all of them. "Put your damn phones down." A couple of women jumped guiltily. Screens disappeared. And in that tense, charged silence, Carol finally exhaled, her heart still hammering from the ferocity of what had just torn through them. The ugly truth was finally out there, raw and trembling in the open air. Maybe it was ruin. Or maybe in some excruciating way, it was the first honest step they'd ever taken as a family. The crack of the slap echoed off the community center's old wooden beams like a gunshot. For a fraction of a second, the entire room seemed to freeze. No breath, no shuffle of feet, just the raw, ringing aftermath of skin on skin. Carol's head snapped to the side from the force of it. Her cheeks stung, white-hot and blooming. Lily let out a tiny gasp, her small hands gripping tighter around Carol's shoulders. Thomas's arms were already there, steadying Carol, pulling her gently back against his chest. She could hear his heart pounding just above her ear, quick and savage. Eleanor stood before them, her hands still half-raised, fingers quivering, as if even she couldn't quite comprehend what she'd just done. Her face was drained of all color, lips parted, eyes wide, with something tangled and ugly, shock, guilt, rage, horror, all twisted together. "How dare you?" Thomas's voice cut through the silence, low and dangerous in a way Carol had never heard. He stepped forward, his hand slipping protectively around her waist, drawing her closer into him, shielding both her and Lily. "How dare you lay a hand on my wife?" A collective horrified murmur rippled through the crowd. Guests who only minutes before had been greedily recording on their phones now looked anywhere but at the family's implosion. Mrs. Langley made a little squeak and fumbled with her purse, muttering something about needing to get home to check on her cat. Marissa was openly gaping, her mouth hanging slack. Eleanor's breath came in ragged pulls. Don't you tell me what I can or cannot do. She is my daughter. She lied to us. She humiliated us in front of everyone we know." "She told her truth," Thomas shot back. His grip on Carol never faltered, even as he glared down her mother with eyes like shards of blue glass. "You just couldn't stand hearing it, so you struck her. And let me be very clear, no one, not even you, ever lays a hand on her again." Carol's throat closed up, tears pooling hot and blinding. Part of her wanted to sink to the floor, to just dissolve from the crushing weight of it all. But Thomas was there, a rock-solid wall behind her, and Lily's tiny arms clung to her with desperate trust. It was enough to keep her upright. Eleanor's eyes darted to Lily, then her gaze faltering, flickering over the little girl's frightened face. Some crack of humanity shone through. Her shoulders crumpled inward as though the sight physically hollowed her out. I never meant," she stammered, voice trailing into a strangled whisper. Her hand dropped to her side, limp and trembling. For one moment she seemed about to reach for Carol again, but instead she recoiled, turning sharply on her heel and nearly stumbling in her haste. Without another word, Eleanor pushed through the crowd, her footsteps loud on the old parquet floor. The door banged behind her with a hollow, echoing finality. Silence swallowed the room, a silence so profound, so dense, Carol could almost feel it press against her eardrums. She could hear Becky's ragged breathing before she even looked over. Her sister had collapsed back into her throne-like chair, hands clutching at her stomach, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Her pretty pink maternity dress was wrinkled, stained from tears or sweat or both. Her eyes, when they finally rose to meet Carol's, were huge and red-rimmed. "This wasn't supposed to happen," Becky croaked, her voice barely carrying across the 2 feet that suddenly felt like a yawning chasm. "I thought today was going to be, it was supposed to be happy, about new beginnings. Not this." Carol blinked. Her cheeks still throbbed in pulses, each one like a cruel echo of her mother's palm. She shifted Lily slightly, feeling the girl's small heartbeat flutter rapid and scared against her collarbone. "I didn't want it to happen this way either," Carol said, and her voice broke right down the middle. "I didn't come here to burn everything down. I came because I thought, maybe stupidly, that we could start being honest, that Lily could know her family, that maybe there was still something here worth saving." Becky let out a noise, half sob, half bitter laugh. "Well, congratulations. Now it's all out there. And what's left, look around Carol." Carol did. The guests who remained were clustered near the walls, whispering furiously to each other. A few still had their phones out, though more discreetly now, sneaking quick videos from behind floral centerpieces. Nobody stepped forward. Nobody offered comfort or even awkward pleasantries. See, Becky's mouth twisted. Everyone's going to remember this as the day Carol Mitchell stormed back into Willow Creek and tore her family to pieces right in front of them. And I'm the pathetic sister who couldn't even keep her own baby shower from turning into a circus. Carol closed her eyes, tears squeezing past her lashes. Thomas pressed a soft kiss to her temple, murmuring something only she could hear. Lily's fingers twined in the ends of her hair, clinging. When Carol opened her eyes again, Becky was staring at her, broken and bewildered. The fight had drained out of her. What was left was raw and tired. Carol took a tiny step forward, then another. She wished she could reach her sister, pull her out of this wreckage. But the space between them was littered with too many sharp pieces, old wounds, new betrayals. Still she tried. "I didn't do this to punish you," Carol whispered. Her voice was ragged, nearly drowned out by the low murmur of guests inching toward the exits. "I did it because I couldn't keep pretending. And maybe it means we finally stop living behind polite lies." Becky's eyes shimmered, her chin quivering, but she didn't move, didn't reach for Carol. Instead, she crumpled in on herself, both hands covering her face as fresh sobs tore through her. Carol's heart cracked open at the sight, but Thomas's hand was on her back again. Lily's breath was warm against her neck, and that was enough to remind her why she'd come, why she'd endured every sharp, humiliating cut. Because hiding hadn't protected any of them. This ugly, exposed raw was the only path forward, however painful. Around them, the crowd slowly dissipated. The bright pink balloons, the pastel cakes, the piles of gifts suddenly all looked grotesque, like decorations at a crime scene. By the time the last pair of scandal-hungry eyes slipped out the door, only immediate family remained. Aunt Patricia hovered by the punch bowl, watching with cautious sympathy. Even James, Becky's husband, stood awkwardly behind his wife, a hand on her trembling shoulder. Carol shifted Lily again, pressing a soft kiss to her daughter's forehead. The little girl was watching Becky with wide, puzzled eyes. "Why's Aunt Becky so sad?" Lily whispered, her voice so sweet and pure it nearly shattered Carol. Because sometimes telling the truth hurts people, Carol managed her throat raw, even when it's the only way to really heal. Becky made a small, strangled sound behind her hands. For a heartbeat, it seemed like she might look up, might speak, but she didn't. She just curled in tighter, her sobs muffled and childlike in a way that broke Carol's heart all over again. Thomas squeezed her side gently. "Let's give them some space," he murmured. His voice was low, steady, anchoring her back to the floor. Carol hesitated, tears spilling freely now. Then she nodded, allowing him to guide her toward the side of the hall where Aunt Patricia waited with open, sad eyes. As they walked away, Carol looked back once more. Becky sat hunched in her chair, her small shoulders shaking, her bright baby shower throne suddenly nothing but a lonely island in a wrecked sea of pink streamers and fallen confetti. And somewhere deep inside, Carol prayed that this devastation was also a beginning, that from this brutal honesty something real might finally grow, even if none of them could see it yet. The late afternoon sun had begun its slow crawl down the sky, stretching long gold bars across the cracked pavement of the Willow Creek Community Center parking lot. Carol stumbled out through the side doors, breath-shallow, heart thundering like it was trying to claw its way up her throat. She spotted her mother immediately. Eleanor Mitchell was halfway across the parking lot, her heels clicking, frantically clutching her purse to her chest like it was a life vest. Her steps were jerky, almost stumbling, her shoulders drawn so tight it seemed they might snap. Mom, Carol called out, her voice cracking. She broke into a jog, weaving between parked cars. "Mom, wait, please." Eleanor didn't slow. If anything, she picked up her pace keys, jangling violently in her hand as she fumbled to find the right one. "Stop running from me!" Carol shouted the words, tearing out ragged. She reached her just as Eleanor's trembling hands finally managed to stab the key into the lock. Carol grabbed her mother's arm, spinning her around so abruptly the older woman let out a startled gasp. They stood there, mother and daughter, locked in a tight, vibrating silence. The sounds of the baby shower were long behind them now, muffled by thick brick walls. Out here it was just cicadas buzzing, a faint breeze carrying the smell of hot asphalt and the echo of two hearts slamming against ribs. Eleanor's eyes darted anywhere but Carol's face. "Let go of me," she whispered. "No," Carol said, her voice low but shaking. "Not until you talk to me. Not until you tell me how you can stand there, slap me in front of half the town, and still act like I'm the one who's hurt you." Her mother let out a strangled laugh, a desperate, breathless thing. "I don't owe you." "You owe me everything?" Carol's voice broke, hot tears blurring her mother's face. "I spent my entire childhood, my entire adult life begging you to look at me, to see me, and all I ever got was scraps. A distracted, 'That's nice, dear,' while you threw everything you had at Becky. You think I don't know? That every time she scraped her knee or broke up with some boy, you were right there, arms open, the perfect mother." Eleanor flinched, her chin trembling. "Becky needed me. She's softer. She doesn't what?" Carol demanded, her voice dropping to a hoarse whisper. "Doesn't remind you of Dad, doesn't scare you the way I do." The accusation hung there, a bitter taste in the cooling air. Something crumpled in Eleanor's expression. Her breath shuddered out, her hand coming up to press against her mouth. For a moment she looked so small, so unbearably fragile that Carol felt her anger falter. "You don't know what it was like," Eleanor finally whispered, voice cracking open like old wood. After he died," she choked, swallowing it down with a harsh shake of her head. "He didn't just die. He left. One minute he was laughing with you girls in the living room, and the next he was on that floor, his heart giving out, and he never came back." Carol stood frozen, the words slicing clean through her. Her mother's chest was heaving, eyes wide and glistening. "You look just like him, Carol. Every stubborn tilt of your chin, the way your eyes spark when you argue, even the way you stand there demanding answers." Eleanor let out a raw, broken laugh. "It's like having him back, except he's not. And every time you smiled at me, every time you succeeded at something, it felt like he was waving goodbye all over again, leaving me here, alone." Carol's hands fell from her mother's arms. She staggered back a half step, staring at Eleanor as if seeing her for the very first time. "You favored Becky because she wasn't a reminder of him," Carol breathed. "Because she needed you. Because I was too much like the man who broke your heart by dying." Eleanor's shoulders crumpled. "Yes," she rasped, barely audible. "And I hate myself for it. God, Carol, I do. I've lain awake so many nights wishing I could have loved you better differently. But you were always so strong, so capable. I thought you didn't need me." Carol's vision blurred completely. A sob clawed up her throat, her hands flying to cover her mouth as if to hold it in. All those years standing in recitals alone, reporting college acceptance letters into a silent void, telling her mother about big promotions, only to watch her eyes drift back to Becky. Suddenly, they snapped into horrifying clarity. It wasn't that her mother hadn't cared, it was that she'd been afraid. Afraid of the ghost living inside Carol's skin. "Oh my God," Carol whispered. "All this time I thought I wasn't enough, that nothing I did would ever compare to Becky, and it was never about me being less, it was about me being him." Eleanor sobbed, then raw and guttural, her hands clutching at the car door like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "You were so much like him, Carol. I couldn't. Every time I looked at you, I was terrified. Terrified you'd love me like he did, that you'd leave me too." Carol felt her knees buckle, catching herself on the hood of the car. The metal was sun-warm under her palms, grounding her in a way nothing else could. Her mother's confession echoed through every hollow part of her chest, lighting up dusty corners she hadn't realized were still aching. They stood there in the failing sunlight, two women bound by the same man in wildly different ways, one who lost a husband, the other who lost a father, both of them fumbling through years of grief that had twisted into something sharp and cruel. Eleanor finally slid down the side of the car, sitting on the hot curb, sobs racking her shoulders. Carol watched her mother shake her own tears, blurring everything into a watery mess. Slowly, hesitantly, she knelt down too. Not close enough to touch, she couldn't quite get there yet, but close enough that their knees almost brushed. Close enough to feel the heat radiating off Eleanor's grief. And for the first time, Carol didn't feel the hollow echo of "why wasn't I enough?" Instead, she felt the raw shape of her mother's terror. The way loss had calcified in Eleanor's chest until she couldn't see her daughter without seeing a coffin, couldn't love Carol without flinching at the inevitable goodbye. It didn't fix anything, it didn't mend decades of lopsided love. But it was a start, a cruel, jagged human start. Carol wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, her voice hoarse. "I didn't leave you, Mom. I was always waiting for you to come find me." Eleanor's sob broke into a shuddering gasp, her face crumpling into her hands. And there, in the lonely heat of the parking lot, mother and daughter sat in their separate islands of pain, finally seeing, finally being seen. They were still crouched by the car, Carol trying to steady her breathing. Eleanor sniffling into trembling hands when the sound of gravel crunching under heavy boots made them both jerk upright. Two uniformed officers were making their way across the lot, their dark blue shirts stark against the sun-bleached pavement. One had a thick clipboard clamped under his arm. The other adjusted his belt, a polite but unreadable expression on his broad face. The badge glinted at his chest, catching the last harsh rays of daylight. "Mrs. Eleanor Mitchell," the taller officer called out, scanning the little scene of mother and daughter kneeling by the car. Eleanor's face went sheet white, all the color draining so quickly it was as if someone had flipped a switch. "Yes, that's me," she rasped. Her hand reached blindly for Carol's arm, finding it with claw-like desperation. Carol rose with her mother, instinctively planting herself half a step in front. "What's this about?" Her voice was low but firm. She surprised even herself with the steadiness of it. The officer's eyes flicked to Carol, then back to Eleanor. "Sorry to intrude like this, ma'am. We were hoping to catch you at home, but when we didn't get an answer, we swung by here after hearing there was a gathering." "I'm Officer Denton. This is Officer Green. We're assisting with an inquiry from the county finance office." Eleanor blinked rapidly. "Finance office, I don't understand." The other officer flipped open the clipboard, rifling through a few sheets. "It's about some discrepancies flagged during a routine audit of local estate settlements." It seems there were undeclared assets following the passing of Robert Mitchell. Several accounts and a parcel of lakefront property weren't documented in the inheritance filings. There's a concern that tax obligations were knowingly avoided. Eleanor's mouth opened, then closed again. Her hand clutched at Carol's wrist so hard it hurt. That was 7 years ago. I don't know anything about... Becky's voice suddenly sliced through the air, shrill and panicked. "Oh my God, what is happening?" Carol turned. Her sister was standing just outside the community hall doors, James hovering behind her with a hand awkwardly braced on her arm. Becky's face was ghostly pale eyes darting from the officers to their mother and back again. "Is my family being accused of something?" Becky demanded, her breath coming in shallow bursts. "Are we going to be arrested? I'm pregnant. I can't. She broke off, sucking in sharp, panicked gulps of air. James gripped her shoulders. "Breathe, Beck. Hey, look at me. Just breathe." The shorter Officer Green held up a placating hand. "No one's being arrested. This is preliminary. But there are enough questions that the county prosecutor's office wants to understand if there was intentional misrepresentation on the estate forms. We need to take statements and probably secure some old financial documents." Carol felt Eleanor sway beside her. For a terrifying heartbeat, she thought her mother might collapse outright. Then Carol's instincts kicked in some fierce protective current roaring to life that had never been tested this way before. She slipped her arm firmly around Eleanor's waist, steadying her, then turned to face the officers head on. "Listen, my mother is clearly in no state to go through all this right now. You'll get full cooperation, financial record statements, whatever you need, but it's going to happen through proper channels. I'll have our attorney contact your office by tomorrow." Officer Denton regarded her for a long beat, then nodded. "That's perfectly reasonable, Ms. Mitchell." Carol said, her voice like steel wrapped in velvet. "Carol Mitchell. I handle most of my family's legal correspondences from Chicago. You can expect a call first thing. If you give me your card, our lawyer will reach out." Green produced a business card, which Carol accepted, with hands that were steady even though her heart was pounding like a war drum. She slid it carefully into her bag. "Thank you for being professional about this," Denton said. "Just be aware if we don't hear anything soon, we'll have to escalate to formal subpoenas." "You won't need to," Carol promised. Her eyes didn't waver. "You'll get everything you need. We'll cooperate fully." Satisfied, the officers tipped their heads politely and retreated to their cruiser. Carol watched them go, her breath locked tight in her chest until the car pulled out of the lot and disappeared down the road. The instant they were gone, Becky let out a strangled sob. "This is a nightmare. This can't be real. We could lose everything, Mom's house, the farm, if there are fines or criminal charges." Eleanor swayed again. Carol turned and caught her mother's shoulder, steadying her. "Mom, look at me. It's going to be okay." But Eleanor's eyes were huge, shimmering with fresh tears. "This is my fault. After your father died, I let things pile up. There were so many forms, so many lawyers. I didn't understand half of it. I just signed where they told me, filed what I was sent. What if I made mistakes? What if I missed something important, and now it's going to tear what's left of us apart?" Carol shook her head firmly. "Stop, don't spiral. This is exactly why you have me. Why I built what I did in Chicago, so I could be the one to handle things when it mattered." Becky stared at her, eyes wide. "What are you saying? You're taking this on?" "For once in my life," Carol said, a hollow laugh breaking around her tears, "I'm going to be the one who fixes something for this family. I'll call my corporate attorney tonight. He'll bring on a tax specialist and a state lawyer, whatever it takes." But if there was fraud," Becky began, voice trembling. "Then we'll deal with it," Carol cut in together. "I'm not going to let some accounting mess from 7 years ago blow us to pieces. Not after everything else we've survived." Eleanor's face crumpled. Her hands rose to cover her mouth again, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. Carol drew in a slow breath, feeling a strange, fierce certainty solidify inside her chest. This family has been fractured by enough secrets. I'm not letting some county investigation be the thing that finally finishes the job. She turned to Becky, held her sister's terrified gaze. "You hear me? I'm not letting it happen." Becky nodded once, a tiny jerk of her head, tears slipping free. James wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Even Eleanor reached out blindly, clutching Carol's hand in a grip so tight it almost hurt. And for the first time in her life, Carol didn't feel like the forgotten daughter, or the overlooked sister, or the second choice. She felt like the damn cornerstone, unsteady, terrified, but resolute. They stood together in the dusky parking lot under a sky streaked with bruised purple clouds, bracing as a family for whatever storm might come next. And Carol realized that for the first time in decades, she was ready to lead them through it. They ended up back inside the now quiet community hall, seated at a round table that hours ago had been heaped with pastel cakes and gift boxes. The remnants of pink streamers lay limp on the floor, crushed under the feet of guests, who had long since scattered, eager to carry the latest Willow Creek scandal back to their porches and kitchen tables. Thomas sat close to Carol, his arm draped protectively along the back of her chair. His body turned toward hers in a way that made it clear this was a united front. Carol leaned into his solid warmth, trying to process the chaos of the last hour. Her cheek still carried a faint, ghostly burn from her mother's slap, even as her heart reeled from Eleanor's parking lot confession. Across from them sat Becky and Eleanor. Becky's face was blotchy, eyes red and swollen, her hands fidgeting restlessly in her lap. Every so often she'd glance at Carol, sharp, darting looks that seemed tangled in some emotion she didn't yet know how to name. Eleanor looked utterly hollowed out, her shoulders bowed as if an invisible weight pressed them toward the floor. Carol exhaled shakily and said, "Okay, here's what's going to happen. First thing tomorrow, I'll call Jordan Rothman in Chicago. He's one of the best corporate attorneys I've ever met. He's handled tax disputes and estate litigation 100 times bigger than this. He'll assemble a team, get every paper from the county, and figure out exactly how exposed we are." Becky's mouth parted. "Jordan Rothman? That's your firm's counsel for Anderson and Burke." Carol nodded. "Technically, he's external, but he's done so much high-stakes work for us. He's practically on speed dial. I'll leverage every relationship I've got to make sure he gives this priority. If we're looking at civil penalties, we'll negotiate. If it's criminal exposure, well, Jordan's worked miracles with far less to work with." Thomas nodded his agreement, squeezing Carol's knee under the table. He's also not afraid to bulldoze local county bureaucrats who think they're playing big shot. He'll keep them from trying to make an example out of your family just to pad their careers. Eleanor let out a tiny, pained sound. "Carol, I don't know how we could ever repay you. And your father's estate, those papers, it was my mess. I should be the one." "It's not about repayment," Mom Carol cut in. Her voice was low but unyielding. "This is family. And it's time I did more than just watch from the sidelines while we all keep pretending everything's fine. If there's fallout, we'll face it together." For a moment, Eleanor only stared at her eyes, brimming her mouth, working soundlessly like she wanted to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Finally, she reached out her gnarled hand, landing lightly atop Carol's. It was tentative, hesitant. But it was also the first time in years Eleanor had reached for her without the filter of social expectations or of carefully managed motherly distance. Just fragile human need. Carol flipped her hand over, threading her fingers through her mother's. Her own heart gave a painful little twist. Then she felt Becky's gaze. It was sharp and searching, those blue eyes, so like their mother's, fixing on her with a nakedness that was startling. Becky's breath hitched. She looked down, then back up, and when she spoke, her voice was brittle but oddly clear. "I spent most of my life assuming you'd— What, Carol, become some sad career woman in a high-rise with nobody to come home to know real life beyond your precious marketing campaigns. That's what we all thought, didn't we, Mom?" Eleanor made a tiny, shamed noise, her shoulders curling inward. Becky's laugh was short-strangled. "And now here we are. I'm the one who still lives in Willow Creek, who'll probably never leave, who's about to raise a baby in the same suffocating little circle. And you're the one who's actually saving us, me Mom, our family name, because of your so-called pointless job, and all those years we looked down our noses at you." There it was, the flush creeping up Becky's neck, the tears welling again, the shudder that racked her shoulders, but also something more complicated. Something like reluctant awe twisted painfully with embarrassment. Carol held her sister's gaze, fighting back the old ache. "Beck, this was never about proving I was better. I didn't come here to—" "I know you didn't!" Becky interrupted, her words tumbling out too fast. "That's what makes it worse. Because I would've. I probably would've used it to rub your face in it. And you didn't. You're just here. Fixing it." Her voice broke. She ducked her head, swiping fiercely at her tears. Carol swallowed hard. She wanted to reach across the table, wanted to say, "We've both been stupid, both been hurt," wanted so badly to bridge the yawning gap. But it was Thomas who reached out first, his hand covering Carol's, which still held Eleanor's. His other hand stretched across the table, palm up, waiting. Slowly, like she didn't quite trust herself, Becky slid her trembling hand into his. A fragile circle, imperfect, bruised, trembling, but a circle all the same. "Here's the thing," Carol said quietly, her voice threading through the space between them. "We can't change the fact that Dad's death wrecked all of us in different ways. We can't erase Mom's fear or my resentment or the ways she paused, exhaling the ways you always felt you had to be the perfect daughter because that's what was expected of you. Becky's eyes glistened. She didn't argue. But maybe we can fix this. Maybe we can pull together for once instead of letting the town or some county prosecutor or even our own guilt rip us apart. Eleanor let out a tiny, shaky breath. What if it's not enough? What if Jordan finds something terrible, some fraud that means prison or losing everything? Then we'll face it with the best damn legal defense money and relationships can buy, Thomas said simply, his hand tightening on Carol's, and we'll still be standing together when it's done. Becky gave a broken laugh, tears slipping down her flushed cheeks. How did you end up being the strong one, Carol? The one with an actual plan, God? I spent so long thinking you were lost. Carol's smile wavered, her own tears threatening. Funny. I used to think the same about you, that your whole life was too small, too scared. Turns out we were both wrong in different ways. Becky gave a watery chuckle. Still feels weird knowing I have to thank my big sister for bailing me out of a potential fraud investigation. You're welcome, Carol said dryly, but her lips twitched into something that might almost be a smile. It was awkward, raw, messy, but it was the closest they'd come to real understanding in decades. Thomas squeezed Carol's hand again, leaning in to murmur in her ear, his lips brushing her temple. I'm proud of you, more than you'll ever know. She let out a long, unsteady breath. Then she looked around the battered circle of her family, her flawed, terrified, desperately trying family, and thought maybe for the first time that she truly belonged right there exactly as she was. Not the overlooked daughter, not the invisible sister, not the family disappointment, but the one holding it all together, the one finally strong enough to help them save themselves. The living room of Eleanor Mitchell's old house smelled faintly of lemon polish and dust, an aroma so woven into the fibers of the worn carpet and floral curtains that even fresh air couldn't quite push it out. Carol sat cross-legged on the floor by the coffee table, stacks of paperwork spread around her like the spokes of a wheel. Her laptop was open screen, glowing with spreadsheets and scanned documents. Becky was perched on the couch above, hugging a throw pillow to her chest as though it might anchor her to earth. Eleanor sat at the other end of the sofa, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles looked bloodless. Thomas hovered nearby, half leaning against the doorway, arms folded, silent muscle steadying her with just his watchful presence. Okay, Carol said at last, exhaling slowly. Her voice was low, calm, almost clinical. She'd dropped fully into work mode, the same controlled register she used to present six-figure marketing proposals to wary boardrooms in Chicago. Jordan sent over the first outline of how we can handle this. It's not great, but it's not catastrophic either. Eleanor let out a little gasp, twisting the hem of her cardigan. Tell me. Just tell me plainly, Carol. Carol tapped a highlighted line on her screen. The county found two main issues. First, Dad's lake property in upstate wasn't disclosed in the inheritance paperwork either, because it got overlooked by whoever drafted the original inventory, or because more likely it was left off intentionally to reduce taxable estate value. Second, there are about $48,000 in dividends from some energy stocks that were never reported. Given how long it's been accruing interest and penalties, it's ballooned. Becky made a small, strangled sound. Oh my God, that's more money than James and I make in half a year. It's serious, Carol said, but it's still considered a civil matter if we file corrected disclosures, now pay the back taxes and negotiated penalties, and show that we're cooperating fully. Jordan's office will coordinate with the county tax attorney and get us into a voluntary compliance program. That will basically close the door on criminal prosecution. Eleanor's breath was coming in shallow, frightened little huffs. How much are we talking? Carol toggled to a new tab. Once penalties are reduced under the voluntary program, you're probably looking at $80,000, maybe $90,000 total lump sum or a very short payment plan. Eleanor swayed, one hand flying to her chest. I don't have that kind of money just lying around, Carol. What if they put a lien on the house? What if— Stop! Carol's voice was sharper than she intended. Her mother flinched. Carol closed her eyes, forced herself to dial it back. When she spoke again, her tone was lower, gentler. Mom, breathe. You're going to pay it. I already spoke to Thomas, and we've agreed to front whatever you can't liquidate from the small savings you have. You'll sign a note with Jordan's firm. I'll take responsibility for the arrangement. Becky's head whipped around, eyes huge. You'd do that after everything. Carol let out a small, humorless laugh. Well, it's not exactly how I thought my marketing bonuses would get spent this year. But yes, I'll do it. Because if we don't, it gets ugly fast. Possible asset seizures, wage garnishments. And if they think for 1 second it was deliberate fraud, that you continued hiding not just sloppy estate paperwork, they could still push for charges. I'm not letting that happen. Eleanor was blinking rapidly, her lower lip trembling. Finally, her eyes found Carol's. You're saving me. After everything I've done to push you away, after ignoring your life, your child, your marriage, you're still standing here cleaning up my mess. It's not for you, Carol said evenly. Her throat tightened, but she forced the words out anyway. It's for Lily, because she deserves to have a grandmother, even a flawed one. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth, a wet gasp breaking from her. Tears spilled down her lined cheeks in shimmering rivulets. I don't deserve that kind of grace, she whispered. No, Carol agreed quietly. Maybe none of us really do. But it's what family's supposed to be, trying again even when we've failed each other. Becky let out a choked sob. She dropped the pillow and leaned forward, grabbing Carol's hand so abruptly it startled them both. I'm sorry, she whispered, tears threading down her own face. I've been so blind, so smug and small. I thought your world was shallow fancy suits and brand campaigns. I didn't see the power you were building, the way you've built something strong enough to carry all of us now. I don't think I ever thanked you for coming today. Carol blinked hard. The words cut deeper than she expected, burrowing into old raw places, but also starting to stitch them together in some crooked, fragile way. There's nothing to thank me for yet. We still have a long way to go. But you showed up! Becky squeezed her hand harder, voice breaking. You're the only one who ever really did, aren't you? Carol couldn't answer that. Her chest ached too much to even try. Instead, she gave a tiny nod, her eyes shining. Thomas moved behind her, placing a warm hand on her shoulder, grounding her again, in a way that was becoming so beautifully familiar. Eleanor sniffled, wiping under her eyes. What do you need us to do next? Carol pivoted her laptop toward them, clicking through forms. You're both going to help me compile every bank statement, every stock document, every old property tax receipt you can dig up. Becky, you'll go through Mom's attic for any boxes of old ledgers or legal envelopes from Dad's lawyers. Once we scan everything, Jordan's forensic accountant will take over. She clicked to another document. Then we'll file amended state and federal returns, a new estate declaration, and voluntary penalty applications. If we do it before the county moves to subpoena, it changes the whole legal narrative, from evasion to proactive compliance. Becky's eyes were wide with a bewildered mix of relief and residual shame. I feel like I don't even know who you are, Carol. Not really. Carol's smile was tired, a little crooked. Yeah, well, maybe that's something we can fix, once this is over. For a moment, none of them spoke. Then Eleanor reached out, tentative and shaking, and rested her hand over Carol's where Becky's already lay. Their 3 hands tangled awkwardly, imperfectly, but together like some fragile living testament that despite everything, they hadn't broken completely. Not yet. Thomas let out a long breath behind them, his hand giving Carol's shoulder the slightest squeeze. In that moment, Carol felt something shift. Not the great sweeping forgiveness people wrote about in novels, not a miracle, but a small recalibration, a new center of gravity for their battered family. And maybe, just maybe, that was how true healing actually started. Not with grand declarations, but with the quiet, dogged decision to stay in the same room, share the same burden, and try awkwardly, painfully to figure out what came next. Together. The living room had grown quiet again, the last murmurs of paperwork and dry explanations trailing off into a fragile hush. Carol sat back on her heels by the coffee table, pressing a knuckle to her mouth to keep her composure. The laptop still glowed faintly with spreadsheets and legal jargon, the cursor blinking like a tiny, relentless heartbeat. Becky hadn't spoken for several minutes. She'd perched on the edge of the couch cushion, hands clenched, white-knuckled in her lap, her gaze skittering everywhere at the carpet, the old family photos on the mantel, the worn spot on the armchair where their father used to rest his head. Anywhere but at Carol. Then all at once she let out a sharp, keening breath. It punched out of her like something had finally cracked wide open. Her shoulders trembled. Her eyes snapped to Carol's face, red-rimmed, desperate, and before Carol could brace for it, Becky pitched forward, collapsing against her. The impact knocked Carol slightly off balance. Her sister's weight was sudden, awkward, her forehead pressing hard into Carol's shoulder. Then Becky's arms wrapped tight around her, clutching at her like she was the only solid thing in a house on fire. And Becky began to sob. Loud, shuddering, unrestrained sobs that tore straight from her chest and shook through Carol's ribs. Her hot tears soaked instantly into the collar of Carol's blouse. Carol froze. For a long, breathless heartbeat, all she could do was sit there, stunned, her arms suspended awkwardly midair. It was such a startling reversal. Becky, the one who'd always seemed so effortlessly adored, so effortlessly centered, was now crumbling against her. Then instinct took over. Carol's arms closed around her sister's trembling shoulders, pulling her in tighter. She pressed her cheek to the top of Becky's head, smelling hairspray and salt in fear. "I'm so sorry," Becky sobbed, the words cracked, nearly swallowed by the rawness in her throat. "I always thought, God, I thought you were so cold, that you didn't care, that you were too busy with your fancy life to bother with us. I didn't realize. I didn't see how much you've been carrying." Carol squeezed her eyes shut. Her own tears broke free, then slipping hot and relentless down her face to vanish in Becky's hair. "You weren't supposed to see it," Carol whispered hoarsely. Her voice sounded foreign to her own ears, thin, scraped, raw. "That was the whole point. I didn't want you to see how tired I was, how lonely it felt. I wanted to protect you from it, from how it felt to always be the one trying so hard to keep everything from falling apart." Becky let out a strangled sob, pulling back just far enough to look at Carol. Her face was blotched and streaked with tears. "But it shouldn't have been you alone, Carr. It was never just your job to fix us. I should have, woken up sooner, asked more, not let everything revolve around me." Carol gave a tiny, broken laugh. "It's what we were taught, though, right? I was supposed to be the strong one. You were supposed to be the precious one. And Mom was just too afraid to see what either of us really needed." Becky's mouth trembled. "I never wanted you to feel alone. And I never wanted you to feel like I resented you. Even when I did sometimes. It wasn't your fault." Becky let out a weak, watery laugh. "This is such a goddamn mess." Carol found herself smiling through the tears. "Yeah, it really, really is." Then Becky's arms tightened around her again, hard enough to make Carol's breath catch. Carol hugged back just as fiercely, burying her face against her sister's shoulder. For the first time since they were little girls hiding under a blanket during thunderstorms, they simply held on to each other, no pretending, no polite family illusions, just raw, aching truth. Their tears mingled, soaking into each other's skin, until it was impossible to tell which salt belonged to which sister. After a long, shivering minute, Becky pulled back slightly, though her hands still clung to Carol's arms. Her swollen eyes searched Carol's face so close their noses almost touched. "I always thought you left because you didn't love us enough to stay." Becky whispered, her voice like crushed paper. "But maybe you left because you loved us too much to let this place choke the life out of you." Carol inhaled sharply, her chest clenching. "Maybe. Or maybe I just needed to figure out who I was without always being compared to you. And maybe you needed to stay here to figure out who you are when it isn't about being the favorite." Becky's laugh was thin-pained. "Well, guess we're both still trying to figure that out, huh?" "Yeah." Carol brushed her thumb under Becky's wet cheek, catching a fresh tear. "But at least now we're not pretending anymore." Becky nodded a jerky, tear-streaked motion. Then she ducked her head, pressing her forehead into the hollow of Carol's collarbone. Carol smoothed her hand up and down Becky's back, slow and careful, like she might with Lily after a nightmare. Thomas stood nearby, his arms crossed loosely over his chest, watching them with eyes that were suspiciously bright. He didn't try to interject, didn't crack a joke to ease the tension. He simply let them have this moment, two sisters finally collapsing all the way into the ugly, beautiful tangle of what it meant to be family. After a while, Becky let out a shuddering exhale. "I don't know how we move forward from here, how we ever go back to normal after all of this." Carol shook her head slightly. "We don't go back, that's the point. We go forward, different, maybe a little stronger, definitely more honest." Becky gave a small, exhausted laugh. "You always did have the better lines. Maybe that's why you're the marketing genius." Carol smiled, a real one this time, fragile but warm. "And maybe you're not half as shallow as I spent my whole life trying to believe. Maybe we were both wrong about each other in exactly the ways we needed to be until we could finally see it straight." Becky sniffled, then let out a tiny hiccuping giggle. "God, we're a disaster." "Yeah," Carol agreed. "But maybe we're a disaster worth saving." They pressed their foreheads together for another long moment, breathing in each other's shaky exhales. When they finally drew apart, it was with a softness neither of them had ever truly shown the other before. Carol reached up and swiped at Becky's wet cheeks, then her own. "All right, now let's go see what Mom's managed to pull out of that ancient file cabinet. We still have a fraud investigation breathing down our necks, and I'd really prefer not to add orange jumpsuits to the family portrait." Becky let out a watery laugh. "Lead the way, big sister." And as they stood up together, arms still loosely wrapped around each other's shoulders, it didn't feel like one was holding up the other anymore. It felt like for the first time they might actually be holding each other up. Equally, completely. And that maybe was what they'd both been waiting for all along. The house was soft with the golden hush of early evening, the old walls glowing warm and forgiving in the low sun. Outside, cicadas droned their familiar endless song. Inside it was astonishingly still, the kind of quiet that felt not empty, but gently full, as though the house itself was holding its breath, savoring this fragile new balance. In the living room, Becky was settled into the deep armchair with her feet tucked up, her round belly prominent under a cotton blouse dotted with tiny sunflowers. Lily stood beside her, small hand resting shyly on Becky's stomach, her curls spilling forward as she leaned close. "Is my cousin sleeping in there?" Lily asked, her voice hushed and awestruck. Becky laughed softly, the sound catching slightly at the end. She placed her own hand over Lily's, pressing it gently. Maybe, or maybe she's doing little flips. That's mostly what it feels like, tiny flips and kicks. Lily's eyes went huge, mouth dropping open, like a fishy, kind of Becky-smiled eyes, bright, but one that likes cupcakes as much as your Aunt Becky. Lily giggled, pressing her hand a little harder. "Can she hear me?" "Oh, I think so," Becky said. Her voice turned tender far away. "You should say hi. Tell her you'll play with her someday." Lily leaned closer until her lips were nearly against Becky's belly. "Hi, baby. I'm Lily. When you come out, we can have tea parties, and I'll show you how to draw a horse." Carol stood in the doorway, one hand pressed to her chest. Something in her ribcage squeezed so tight it almost hurt, but it was a sweet, aching kind of hurt. Watching Lily's tiny fingers splayed over Becky's stomach felt like witnessing a fragile miracle, like seeing the first green shoot crack through cold earth. Further across the room, Eleanor sat on the couch with a large leather-bound photo album balanced across her knees. For a long time, she simply traced the raised gold lettering on the cover, her thumb moving back and forth as if absorbing its texture. Then she let out a long sigh, soft and tremulous, and looked over at Lily. "Sweetheart," she called gently, "will you come sit by Grandma for a minute?" Lily's head popped up. She glanced at Becky, who gave her an encouraging nod and then scampered over. Her tiny feet made light taps on the old hardwood. She climbed up beside Eleanor without hesitation, curling her legs under her in a little nest of cotton dress and soft limbs. Eleanor didn't reach for her right away. Instead, she opened the album with slow reverence, as though worried any sudden movement might send it all scattering. The pages fell open to a photo of Robert Mitchell Carroll's father standing in the backyard with a rake slung over his shoulder, grinning broadly at the camera. "This was your Grandpa, Rob," Eleanor murmured. Her voice trembled, but she kept it steady by sheer will. "He loved to garden. Those sunflowers out back that grow taller than the fence. He planted those, said he wanted the whole yard to look like it was smiling." Lily peered down at the photo, brow crinkling. "He's handsome, like a movie star." Eleanor laughed quick and startled a sound half forgotten in this house. "He would have loved hearing you say that. He used to tell me he wasn't half as good-looking as I pretended, but I think he was just being modest." She flipped another page. There was Robert again this time, with a tiny squirming baby in his arms. Carol bald and furious, waving a clenched fist at the camera. Lily pointed her eyes wide. "That's Mommy." "Yes," Eleanor whispered. Her fingertips grazed the photo. "And that was the first day your Grandpa held her. He was so scared, said he was afraid he'd break her, but I knew even then she was always going to be the strong one." Carol's throat closed up so tight she could hardly breathe. She leaned back against the wall, hand pressed over her mouth, blinking rapidly to hold back tears. Eleanor glanced up at Lily again, her eyes softer than Carol could ever remember. "Your Mommy was a lot like you, curious, bright, always asking questions. And your Grandpa, he'd just scoop her up and carry her around the yard, naming all the flowers." Lily wriggled closer, tucking herself under Eleanor's arm. "Tell me more about him," she pleaded. And just like that, the last of Eleanor's rigid pride seemed to melt. Her arm curled around Lily, drawing her in tight. "I'll tell you everything, sweetheart. How he used to whistle when he was happy. How he taught your Mommy to ride a bike right down the middle of Maple Avenue, even though I fussed it wasn't safe. How he'd dance with her on his feet in the kitchen. All of it." They bent their heads together, grandmother and granddaughter, over the photo album that now seemed to breathe with a pulse of its own. Page by page, Eleanor pointed out old birthdays, Christmas mornings, silly backyard snapshots. She told Lily tiny details, the way Robert always snuck extra sugar into his coffee, how he once spent an entire afternoon building a lopsided birdhouse just because Carol wanted to paint it. And Lily listened rapt, her little hand still wrapped around Eleanor's. Every so often she'd glance across the room and beam at Carol like she was saying, "Look, Mommy, I'm learning where we come from." Through it all, Thomas stood by the archway. He hadn't moved for minutes, his shoulder braced against the frame, hands tucked in his pockets. His gaze was locked on Carol, steady, warm, almost unbearably tender. When their eyes met, his mouth curved in a small private smile meant just for her. Carol felt something inside her settle. The sight of Lily curled against Eleanor, the faint sound of Becky's laugh, as she watched from the armchair the solid weight of Thomas's devotion holding it all in place. It was as if the house had taken a deep breath and decided just this once to sigh out peace instead of tension. She crossed the room, slowly brushing her hand along Thomas's as she passed. His fingers closed around hers, instantly squeezing in a gentle promise. They stood like that together, side by side, watching 3 generations of Mitchell women stitch something fragile and new out of all their old fractures. And in that soft, fading light, with her husband's hand in hers, and her daughter learning the stories of long-gone sunflowers, Carol realized maybe this was how families healed. Not with grand speeches or perfect apologies, but with quiet evenings and photo albums and little girls who wanted to know where they came from. Maybe she thought as she leaned into Thomas that was enough. Maybe that was everything. Rain slicked down the windows of the old Mitchell house in long, lazy rivulets gathering at the bottom and streaking across the warped wooden sill. Outside, the lawn was a blur of emerald and mist, the hydrangea bushes bowing low under the weight of fresh water. The scent of rain snuck in through a cracked window, mingling with the faint musk of the living room, a mixture of old upholstery, floor polish, and something uniquely Mitchell history. Inside, they were gathered in a loose circle. Thomas sat on the floor with Lily helping her arrange crayons into neat rows of color. Becky curled up on the armchair with a light throw around her shoulders, absently rubbing her belly. Eleanor occupied the corner of the couch, her hands clasped loosely, a tentative peace in her eyes that still seemed miraculous to behold. Carol sat cross-legged on the rug, her back resting against the couch, Lily's little feet pressed companionably against her thigh. The rain drummed a soft, hypnotic rhythm on the roof like gentle hands, coaxing old wounds to finally loosen. "Mommy, tell me more about when you were little," Lily piped up. Her voice was soft but insistent, full of that particular brightness that always made Carol's chest squeeze. "Tell me about this place." For a long second, Carol hesitated. Her gaze drifted to the window, watching droplets race each other to the bottom pane. For years, Willow Creek had been a name that tasted like rust on her tongue, something she spat out or swallowed back, never just spoke. Even with Thomas, she'd kept most stories of this place shallow, skimming the surface, so she wouldn't have to remember what churned beneath. But Lily's expectant eyes were too trusting to refuse, and maybe Carol thought it was finally time. She took a slow breath. "All right, Bug, you want a story? I'll give you one." Lily's grin blossomed. She shuffled closer, tucking her legs under her like a tiny bird, hands folded neatly in her lap. "This town, Willow Creek, looks pretty small, doesn't it?" Carol began, her voice low, threading itself into the hush of rain. "Just a few streets, a couple of churches, some old brick buildings that everyone's too stubborn to tear down." Lily nodded solemnly, as if she were taking mental notes. "But when I was your age, it felt enormous. Every corner was a place to explore. In the summers, Grandpa Rob would take me and Aunt Becky fishing at Willow Lake. We'd pack peanut butter sandwiches and a little blue cooler full of cherry soda. Grandpa would let me steer the old rowboat. I thought I was basically the captain of a pirate ship." Becky let out a soft laugh from her chair. "You nearly rammed us into the dock that one time." Carol shot her a wry grin. "Yeah, and Dad pretended to make you walk the plank. Remember how mad you got?" "Mad I was terrified. I thought you'd let me drown." Lily giggled, the sound high and pure, echoing off the rain-smeared walls. Carol's heart pinched at how easily it mingled with memories. "Your grandpa," Carol continued, turning back to Lily. "He was gentle and funny. He'd put dandelions behind his ear and call himself the King of Summer. He taught me to ride my bike right down Maple Avenue, even though Mom worried I'd tip over." Eleanor made a small sound, half apology, half bittersweet amusement. Carol didn't look at her yet. She wasn't ready to knot while dredging these fragile old snapshots up from the depths. "But he got tired sometimes," Carol went on, carefully choosing her words as though tiptoeing through a maze. "Tired in a way that didn't have anything to do with his body. I didn't understand it then. I just knew he'd sit on the porch some nights staring at nothing, like he was looking for something far away. Or maybe remembering something he lost." Thomas's hand slid across the rug, his fingers hooking lightly around hers. Carol squeezed back, grateful for the anchor. "Then one day he was gone," she said softly. Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. "His heart, well, it just decided to stop being strong, and that left all of us feeling a little broken." Lily's brow furrowed. She didn't quite understand death yet, not truly, but the idea of missing someone was familiar. "Is that why Grandma is sometimes sad?" she asked in a tiny voice. "Yes, love. And maybe that's why Mommy used to feel sad too. I thought if I ran far enough, if I built a life with tall buildings and big offices and lakes that weren't Willow Lake, I wouldn't have to remember the way it felt to lose him here." Carol's throat worked around a knot. She glanced at Becky, who was quietly dabbing her eyes, and then at Eleanor. Her mother's expression was naked with grief, but also with awe, like she couldn't quite believe Carol was sharing these truths aloud. "But I was wrong," Carol whispered, turning back to Lily, "because even when I tried to keep this place locked away in a box inside my heart, it still mattered. Grandpa still mattered. This town, this messy, hard, beautiful place made me who I am, and I want you to know about it, even the painful parts." Lily crawled forward without a word and climbed into Carol's lap, pressing her ear over her mother's chest like she was trying to listen to the echoes of all those old stories trapped there. Carol's arms folded around her automatically, her lips brushing the top of Lily's head. From across the room, Eleanor's voice trembled into the quiet. "He would have adored you, Lily. You would have been his little sunbeam, just like your mommy was." Lily peeked up her eyes round. "Tell me more, Grandma." Eleanor hesitated, then reached for the photo album on the coffee table. Her hands were still a little shaky, but there was a new softness in the way she cradled it. She opened to a page with a faded picture of Robert Mitchell lifting a squealing toddler Carol high above his head. "That's the man who taught your mommy to pick strawberries, who danced with her in the kitchen, who made up bedtime stories about pirate princesses. He'd have spun you around the yard until you were dizzy with giggles." Carol swallowed a sob that tried to claw up. She felt Thomas's hand tighten around her shoulder, his thumb brushing a slow line against her neck. "And maybe," Eleanor added after a long moment, her voice thin but determined, "you'll let an old lady like me keep telling you all about him, so you can carry him forward even though he's not here to do it himself." Lily nodded, solemn and trusting. "Okay." Then she slid from Carol's lap and scooted next to Eleanor on the couch, curling up under her arm to peer down at more old photos. Becky rose, waddled over, and sank into the other side, resting her cheek briefly on their mother's shoulder, just for a breath, just long enough. Thomas leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to Carol's temple. "You did it," he murmured. "You let the past be real. That's how it stops owning you." Carol exhaled shakily, her eyes shining. "Maybe that's how we all finally start living in it together instead of alone." Outside, the rain kept falling, steady and quiet. Inside, the Mitchell family sat tangled together on the couch, sharing stories, touching old paper memories, stitching new ones between every heartbeat. And for the first time in forever, Carol didn't feel like she was running. She felt exactly where she was meant to be. The sun was sinking behind the skyline of Chicago, setting the edges of the towering buildings ablaze in molten gold. Down by Lake Michigan, the air carried a cool breeze that smelled faintly of water and fresh-cut grass. Boats bobbed in their slips, the docks creaked with lazy satisfaction, and seagulls wheeled overhead, crying out like tiny heralds of summer's slow retreat. Carol stood by the lakeside path, her hands stuffed into the pockets of a soft denim jacket. Beside her, Thomas leaned against a lamppost with casual ease, a faint grin playing at his lips as he watched the little tableau unfolding on the grass. Just ahead, Lily was a blur of bright floral print and flying curls darting between Becky and Eleanor with delighted squeals. Her small hands grasped at theirs, tugging them forward, making both women stumble awkwardly over the uneven ground, giggling despite themselves. "Come on!" Lily shouted. "Faster! Grandma, faster, Aunt Becky! We have to race to the big tree!" Eleanor's laughter was surprisingly rich. It cracked open something inside Carol every time she heard it, proof that the brittle, fragile mother she'd known all these years still had laughter tucked away, waiting to be coaxed out by the right pair of small hands. Becky was slower, more cautious, still mindful of her body after the birth just weeks ago, but she tightened her grip on Lily's hand and half-jogged anyway, breathless with the effort and her own bubbling amusement. Thomas chuckled under his breath. "If I didn't see it with my own eyes, I'd never believe it. Your mother actually running." Carol smirked. "That's Lily for you. Nobody else ever managed to pull Mom out of her own head the way she does." Thomas leaned over and pressed a kiss to her temple, his breath warm against her skin. Maybe because Lily didn't come with old history attached, just new hope. Carol didn't answer, but she leaned into him a little, her eyes still tracking the three figures as they reached the huge oak tree at the bend in the path. Lily let go of their hands and twirled in dizzy circles, arms flung wide. Her laugh rang out bright and unburdened, and it seemed to ripple right through the gentle hush of the approaching evening. Eleanor sat down carefully on a bench beneath the tree, a little winded but still smiling. Becky collapsed beside her, her head falling to rest on Eleanor's shoulder with a familiarity that looked fresh again, like they were learning to do it all over without old resentments coloring every touch. Lily plopped right onto the grass at their feet, tugging daisies and clover from the lawn, stringing them into clumsy chains. Carol felt her chest fill so full it almost hurt. She stepped forward, drawn by something she didn't quite have a name for, some instinct that told her she needed to be there too, not on the sidelines. When she reached them, Becky looked up. "Hey, stranger," she teased softly, nudging Carol's hip with her elbow. "Thought maybe you were going to stay back there making hard eyes at your husband all evening." Carol rolled her eyes but couldn't suppress her grin. She sank down onto the bench next to her mother, feeling the slat of wood shift under their combined weight. Eleanor's hand hesitated in her lap, then slowly crept over to rest atop Carol's knee. The touch was light a question more than a declaration, but Carol didn't pull away. Instead, she covered Eleanor's frail hand with her own. Lily held up a lopsided daisy chain. "Look what I made, Grandma." "It's beautiful," Eleanor said, her voice thick. She bent to let Lily drape it carefully over her gray curls. "How do I look?" "Like a flower queen," Lily crowed. Becky burst out laughing. "Well, that's one for the photo album." Carol's phone was already in her hand, snapping a shot before the moment could slip away. She knew better than anyone how quickly these perfect little windows closed, how easily life pulled you back into complications and old hurts. But for now, she wanted to trap it in pixels. Eleanor with her daisy crown. Lily beaming with proud delight, Becky's arm draped lazily over her mother's shoulders. "Hey, Thomas," Carol called without looking away from her screen. "Get over here." Thomas sauntered up, hands shoved in his pockets, his grin boyish and crooked. "Yes, ma'am. What's the photo directive?" Carol tilted the camera outward, snapping a few messy selfies that caught all of them crowded together, cheeks pressed close. In one, Lily was half blurred from giggling so hard her head thrown back in delight. In another, Eleanor was actually wiping tears from the corners of her eyes, though her smile was steady. When Carol finally lowered her phone, she didn't even try to fight the prickle behind her own eyes. "I want Lily to have these," she murmured, "so she knows exactly where she came from. All of it, the messy, stubborn, wonderful parts." Becky bumped her shoulder gently, "And so someday she'll roll her eyes at you and say, 'Ugh, Mom, stop being so sentimental,' just like we did." Carol laughed, even though it broke halfway into something tender. "Yeah, exactly like that." Eleanor's thumb rubbed a faint line back and forth over Carol's knee. It was almost an unconscious gesture, like something she might have done to soothe Carol as a baby, except this time it was tentative learning again how to be close. "I don't deserve all this grace you keep handing me," Eleanor whispered, her eyes still on Lily as she twirled in the grass. "I spent so long making sure you felt like second best, and now here you are, letting me be part of your daughter's life." Carol's heart clenched. She squeezed her mother's hand. "I'm not doing it for you, Mom," she said quietly, but not unkindly. "I'm doing it for Lily, because she deserves every piece of her family, no matter how flawed, and because maybe we all do." Thomas laid his hand on Carol's shoulder, then warm and grounding. "Turns out you were always the strongest one in the room," he murmured. Maybe Carol breathed. She looked at Lily, chasing fireflies, now her laughter stitching into the early night. Or maybe I just finally figured out where my strength was meant to go. They stayed like that for a long time, talking low sometimes, just letting the hush of the lake and the city beyond fill the spaces between words. Lily ran back and forth, bringing handfuls of wildflowers, pressing them into Eleanor's hands, tucking tiny clovers behind Becky's ear. At one point, Lily climbed right onto the bench, wedging herself happily between Carol and her grandmother. She leaned her head against Eleanor's shoulder, one small hand finding Carol's, as if to tether them all together. And in that quiet Chicago dusk, with the skyline blazing behind them and the water whispering secrets only the lake knew, Carol let herself believe that healing didn't have to be dramatic. Sometimes it was just this: a shared bench, tangled fingers, laughter chasing away old ghosts. Maybe that was family, not perfect, not unbroken, but still choosing every day to sit down next to each other anyway. And that, Carol thought as she squeezed Lily's tiny hand between hers and her mother's, might just be enough to rewrite everything that had come before. "I never imagined the cruelest day of my life would unfold right at my sister's baby shower. When I stood up in that hall of familiar faces, took my husband's hand, and called my daughter over, the entire room went silent. My mother went pale, and Becky, the golden child raised on a pedestal, screamed that I'd destroyed her life just to get revenge. In that instant, I realized years of quiet suffering had turned me into a ghost in my own family. But not anymore. If you think this is just another ordinary family story, you're wrong. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next shocking chapters we bring you.